Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Dr. Stephen Smith's lecture on trade, tariffs, and Trump. What is ahead for the United States? My name is Peter Lilich. I'm a senior studying economics and mechanical engineering, and this past summer I had the opportunity to serve as Professor Smith's research assistant, and it's my privilege to to introduce him today. Dr. Smith is the Robert W. Hack Chair in Economics here at Hope College. He previously taught at Middlebury College and Gordon College and has twice served as a visiting scholar at the United States International Trade Commission in Washington, D.C. A widely published specialist in international economics and economic development, he has also written extensively on the relationship between Christian ethics and economics. He has served as the president of the Association of Christian Economists and is a longtime member of the American Enterprise Institute. Additionally, in 2013, he co-authored, along with Ed Knoll and Bruce Webb, Economic Growth, Unleashing the Potential of Human Flourishing, which has been published by AEI. He earned his PhD in economics at Stanford University and his BA at Williams College. One final note before we begin, there will be a time for refreshments and additional conversation following the lecture in the atrium. There will also be a sign-up sheet for students for class credit. Now, would you please join me in welcoming Dr. Smith?
Peter, thank you so much for that kind introduction. It is wonderful to be here, so I thank you all for being here. And I'm really pleased to have this chance to speak with you about President Trump's tariff policies, just announced yesterday. So our timing is perfect. I'm really grateful for that. But I also want to offer particular thanks to Kelsey Sievertson for her terrific logistical skill in pulling this all together. Very grateful. Oh, excuse me, the clicker. Well, that's unfortunate. But, pardon? Yeah, I can use the keyboard. That's no problem. Yeah. Oh, you know, it's not. That's not. The keyboard's not working either. Let's see here. Yeah, great. Okay. Yeah, no problem. Great. People, thanks for your patience. Really appreciate it. So, Trump is a polarizer. Newsflash. He triggers arguments about all kinds of economic policy and cultural issues. But for our time here, I want to focus virtually exclusively on the question of tariffs and the likely consequences of his trade policies for the U.S. and for the world. I'm going to focus relentlessly on what I believe to be true and what the true likely consequences of those policies will be. Others of you may see this differently, and but I'm going to give you my straightest shot possible in terms of what I think is actually happening. I feel like I owe you nothing less than that. So as we're all aware, the president announced his main plan yesterday. The caveat here is that tomorrow it may change a lot. This is the reality of policymaking in the era of President Trump. So although he offered some very specific plans about what's happening with tariffs, or what's going to happen with tariffs, I think he's mercurial, and his decisions change from time to time. So this whole talk has a big caveat associated with it, which is that I don't know how much, exactly how long the current new policy will last. But I have a feeling we may be on the verge of something that does stick. Trump's Liberation Day announcement seems to portend a tremendous change in U.S. international trade policy. And I would describe it as the largest change in U.S. trade policy since the Bretton-Woods Agreement at the end of World War II. That was 80 years ago, more than 80 years ago. This is, I think, going to be a big deal. So I've organized this talk as a series of answers to a hypothetical person I'm talking with. So my friend just asked me, what the heck happened? What's going on there? Well, what to make of all of this? Well, keeping in mind that until just like 2 years ago, the average U.S. tariff on the weighted average tariff on all goods that we import into the country was around 1.6%. Keeping that in mind, here's the list of the new tariffs that are now going to fall into place. At the top, there's a 10% baseline tariff on all imports from any country into the United States, 10%. Nations, though, and just kind of working through this, nations that the White House considers bad actors, and we'll talk about that in a minute, will be hit with duties that he calls a discounted reciprocal tariff. And so, like for Japan, that'll be 24%. For the EU, it'll be 20%. And that'll be instead of the 10% tariff. That'll happen early next week. A new 34% tariff on China that gets added on top of all of China's previous Trump tariffs. So, now the baseline for Chinese tariffs now is 54%, but we need to add the 25% tariffs imposed on steel and aluminum that continue over for China from the Biden and Trump presidencies. Mexico and Canada are exempted from the reciprocal tariff regime, but they remain subject to the 25% tariffs on most imports to the U.S., which Trump says are deserved because of their role in fueling the fentanyl crisis in the United States. Also, a 25% tariff on all automobiles imported to the United States as of today. For the record, here's the New York Times list of the bad actor countries. This is there's 50 of them altogether. These are the top 10. And I look at this and I have to tell you, I don't see any particular rhyme or reason for these new for the specific tariffs that are listed here as the new ones for these regions. But the argument that Trump made yesterday was that these countries hadn't been playing fairly by the rules of trade. They were using non-monetary, he called it non-monetary barriers to repel our exports, to not buy our exports. These are actually a real thing. Economists tend to call them non-tariff barriers rather than non-monetary barriers, but many countries do have a number of non-tariff kinds of barriers to importing from other countries. There'll be often quotas on how much can be imported. There'll be special subsidies for firms that a country wants to protect or encourage. There'll be sweetheart deals for finance and providing credit to particular firms that the government wants to support. All that kind of thing. The U.S. has tended to turn a blind eye to that kind of thing. For the sake of the global order and the slow but steady progress towards freer trade that's occurred, in the West and in much of the rest of the world since the 1950s. And of course, Trump didn't mention that the US itself has frequently used very similar methods. The famous chicken tax on the EU that Lyndon Johnson imposed, now almost as old as I am. It's crazy. The Plaza Accord in the 1980s, when the United States twisted Japan's arm to raise the value of its exchange rate so that the U.S. could sell more goods in Japan. And then, of course, the quote-unquote voluntary trade agreements, trade restrictions that the United States twisted Japan's arm to agree to later in the 1980s. So the U.S. doesn't necessarily come at this with the cleanest of hands, but we don't really know the calculations here that went into these new tariffs, so I really can't say much about the specifics of them, but here is the important thing. These are gargantuan. These are the biggest tariffs the United States has ever had. They make the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, which were 25% in 1930. They make them look like bikers. They make them look like just little hedges that countries could jump over compared to this. The U.S. is basically swapping out its 1.6% weighted average tariff for seemingly permanent tariffs on the order of 20, 30, 40, 50% or more on the other trading countries of the world. So, to be clear, the passage of the Smoot-Hawley Act in 1930 contributed to a decline in global trade that made the Great Depression worse. And I just want you to keep that in mind when you think about the size of these tariffs. I think it's fair to say that the White House announcement yesterday, Trump's announcement, likely marks the end of a long period since the end of World War II, a long period of U.S. leadership on global trade policy. That leadership brought us the slow but steady opening up of global trade in the context of U.S.-designed trade rules and generated decades of sustained growth at home and abroad. That period appears to be over. So my friend has asked me a question. Trump certainly thinks that the tariffs are paid by foreigners. Let me read you this quote from yesterday afternoon in the Rose Garden. Quote, "I will immediately begin the overhaul of our trade system to protect American workers and families. Instead of taxing our citizens to enrich other countries, we will tariff and tax foreign countries to enrich our citizens. For this purpose, we are establishing the External Revenue Service to collect all tariffs, duties, and revenues. It will be massive amounts of money pouring into our treasury, coming from foreign sources." He's clearly got this idea in mind that the tariffs will be taxes that get paid by foreigners. But the reality is that the new U.S. tariffs are in fact taxes, and they're paid by U.S. residents. Not exclusively, but basically paid by U.S. residents. Literally, the taxes are paid by exporters abroad to the U.S. Treasury Department. But who actually bears the burden of the tax depends upon the elasticities of supply and demand for the product. And so, forgive me if I dive into a little bit of technical economics that my students who had me in microeconomics will recognize. In that class, I like to talk about the federal excise tax on beer. You put that excise tax together with the Michigan tax on beer, and it's a $25 tax for a bar or any place that wants to have a keg of beer, a barrel of beer. It's a $25 tax for that privilege. Excuse me. And literally, brewers in St. Louis will send $25 to the Treasury Department to pay for that tax. But they mark up their price. and they easily pass that tax on to everybody who wants to get a sip of the beer from the barrel. The bottom line is that buyers of the barrels pay that tax. It's passed straight through to consumers in large part. Something like 80% of it goes straight on to consumers, and a small remaining amount stays as a tax on the supplier. Well, the moral of the story is that our foreign exporters who are exporting products to us, they're the suppliers, and they will pay a small amount of the tariff taxes that get charged, but in all likelihood, not most of it. So this point, I think, is a pretty important point. These tariffs will mostly be borne by the United States. And I've just walked through that argument. There's another piece to the payment of tariffs, though. By definition, the things that U.S. Residents and U.S. firms want to import are things that can't be easily had in the United States, or a better quality than is available at home, or cheaper than what is available at home. So buying fewer imported goods definitely harms U.S. welfare overall. So my friend asked about this. Prices will stay the same, won't they? Nope. Not a chance. Basically, tariffs allow, encourage, and often force domestic firms to raise prices. When an imported product that's competitive with a domestic product has to pay a tariff, its price rises, and that gives the domestic competitor room to raise its price. And as Trump said a few days ago, why wouldn't it? He amended that quote the next day, and
I didn't say that.
yeah, I didn't say that, right? But actually, excuse me, I have that backwards. At first he said, no, I don't want them to raise prices. But then he said, well, why wouldn't they? And denied that he had said that they wouldn't. Well, there's actually a bigger problem here. Lots of essential parts are imported from abroad, and the firms that need those things, they're not simply competing with other domestic producers. The firms that are using imported parts to make exports to sell in other parts of the world really have no choice but to pay the tax and pass those costs on to the buyers as much as possible. But it likely reduces the overall amount of U.S. exports. And it's that last bullet point that I just was trying to lean into here. 100% chance of tariff retaliation. There's just no way to avoid this. Let me just say though, for details, just stand by on your Signal app for the dates, times, and size of the tariffs on exports. Countries will retaliate without question, but the really interesting thing here about this, and the painful thing about this, is that exports to other countries are harmed by this kind of by this kind of higher cost of inputted prices used in imported inputs, used in production. Economists say that what's going on is that import protection is export taxation, and that's a real thing. That's a real thing here. So So basically, if we were to take all of the answers to questions 2, 3, and 4 and put them together here, I'd say that the prognosis is pretty bad. Large tariffs will raise prices and reduce exports. The internal reorganization necessary within firms to reshore their production stateside will be expensive and time-consuming. That makes for a strong likelihood of a recession, meaning lower incomes and higher unemployment. You know, economists often have the reputation of disagreeing with one another, and of course Harry Truman, with his famous joke about wanting the one-handed economist, kind of gets at that. An economist who could just say, this is the way it is, no second-hand counterpoint to it. The reality is that in the economics profession, on this point, there's virtual unanimity that the outcomes here are going to be really problematic. This isn't just me. This is a consensus across the discipline. Multiple thousands of economists have signed petitions in recent months to encourage Trump to forego what he has just done. This is very much a consensus view. We'll see if this happens. Other things could intervene, but honestly, this does look really grim at this point. Well, at least his plan sticks it to China, huh? Well, it does and it doesn't. It is true, China has the highest tariffs. In this system, China will get the highest tariffs that the US charges, that eye-watering 70% tariff or more. But there's little else in the Trump trade plan that addresses anything really geostrategic to challenge China, to address the challenge that China presents. In fact, by making it indiscriminately harder for other nations to export to us, we give China the option of welcoming them into their orbit. A good question to ask here is, what happens to Thailand or to Ghana or to Brazil when the US stops importing most of the imports that they hitherto had sent to us? I can say more about China in the Q&A if people wish. There's actually a lot to say about the strategic things that need to happen because of in China's situation for the West to face that well. So let's go to question 6. Well, at least we'll get our trade deficit fixed. It'll be nice to have a positive trade balance again. Well, no, actually. If there's retaliation, there's no hope of balanced trade. And as crazy as it sounds, and as big as our trade deficit is, it was negative $1.13 trillion last year in calendar year 2024. It's mostly made at home. There are things we could do to eliminate it if we were willing to do some hard things at home, like cutting our federal budget deficit or raising our savings rate. I think this is worth thinking about in just a tiny bit more detail. There's an equation that economists call the basic macro ID. It's an identity. So there should be an identity sign there between the trade balance and the other stuff, and not just an equal sign. It's an identity that says basically, whatever your government budget balance is in a year, plus whatever your net private savings are in a year, that's your trade balance. I'll explain in a minute why we know that. Well, look at our Okay, we're a little bit covered up there, but that's okay. Look at our federal budget balance from the past 5 calendar years. These are figures in trillions of dollars. These represent all of them just astonishingly large budget deficits from the federal government. Those sit right there, and our net private savings aren't very big, and so those big federal budget deficits dominate what happens on the trade balance. And here's what's going on. The U.S. makes goods and services and also borrows a lot of money. That's the budget balance. When we buy a product from China or from Indonesia or from Brazil, they take, we pay for it. They're left holding US dollars, and there's only 3 things you can do with US dollars. You can buy US goods, you can buy US services, or you can buy US assets. Now, our Treasury is begging for people to buy US bonds. And so we shouldn't be surprised that son of a gun, China and other countries around the world, are happy having sold us something and gotten our payment from it. They're happy to turn around and buy US bonds with it. They're safe, high yielding, nice investments. Why not? We are, to the extent that the trade deficit is a problem, it's something that we are contributing mightily to and are acting as if we are completely uninvolved with it, and that it's foreigners' problem that we have a trade deficit. It's directly linked to our inability to rein in our government budgets, our government spending. So my friend tells me that I sound like a globalist.
You're in charge of global studies.
There you go. And of course, the truth is, guilty as charged. Yeah, I am a globalist, 100%. I think that is absolutely the way to help the United States. But here's why. The basic thing that's going on, I would say here, is it's trade and specialization. Also known as specialization and exchange, is a powerful tool for growth and human flourishing. And here's how it works. Households, firms, nations will specialize in making particular things that they can produce relatively easily and inexpensively, and then exchange those things for goods that would be relatively expensive to make at home, but which other countries can make more efficiently or at less cost. This is one way of stating the idea of comparative advantage that I know many of the students here have studied in their economics courses. It's extremely costly for households and nations to try to make at home everything that they need. But specialization in trade allows households and nations access to all kinds of goods and services and assets too that they might want, and that's why welfare almost always rises with trade. Incredibly, although specialization and exchange is such a powerful and ubiquitous force in the world, a lot of people don't actually understand or recognize it at work. I've sometimes asked people, sometimes asking students, sometimes asking friends, what did you make? What did you make for supper? Well, and they'll tell me about what they made. Yes, they put a roast in the oven. Who made the oven? Yes, they scrambled eggs. Who made the eggs? Where did the chickens come from? To really think about about how things get made, you have to ask the question, do any of us, in fact, really, truly make a meal? Or make the clothes that we wear? Although, of course, in some households, people can happily, as an avocation, make clothing for a household. We use natural gas that we didn't make, but piped into our house. We use pots and pans that were made in China and in Europe. We use fruits and vegetables grown all over the world. You get the idea. We specialize in doing particular things and then use the proceeds of that to pay for everything else that we need. The way I think of it is that we swim in a sea of trade, but think that we make things. Add to this that the deeper the specialization that occurs in an economy, the bigger the gains will be from exchange. Let's take medicine as an example. There are surgeons, there are ophthalmological surgeons, and there are pediatric ophthalmological surgeons. Think about how wonderful it is to have MDs who are surgeons who can work specifically on children who've suffered eye injuries. My understanding is there's several dozen of those in West Michigan. I'm not entirely sure on that number. But that's what they do. That serves the community beautifully. And their salaries pay for all the other things that they need, the imports and so on, that they might enjoy in their homes. Plus, of course, the things made in the United States. So the deeper the specialization, the bigger are the gains from exchange. And it's deeper even than that. When we look at trade balances with particular countries or particular vendors, it really doesn't matter much what our balances are. Meijer, the grocery store, I buy all kinds of things from them. I spend thousands of dollars at Meijer every year, and they've never bought anything from me. And so I have a gross trade deficit with Meijer. I've been buying stuff they never buy from me, and that's totally great. And that's true for households, and it's true for nations. All that, to the extent that the trade deficit matters, it only matters in the aggregate. To pick on particular countries for outsized or too small trade deficits or importing is just inappropriate and off base. And finally, I'd like to point out here about these things that that there's a well-documented, over the past 80 years, well-documented evidence of the way that engagement with global trade raises countries' productivity. The poor developing countries that have chosen to open themselves up to trade and to engage in trade themselves are the ones who have done the best. No question about it. The ones that have tried to close themselves off, the North Koreas of the world, who have tried to make everything on their own at home, are doing terribly. China did terribly before they started their partial opening to market liberalization and trade, and good things started to happen. This is so from top to bottom, specialization and exchange brings prosperity, brings growth, allows countries to build capital, provide education to people, build health facilities. The benefits of trade, the gains to trade, get capitalized in all these really fruitful ways in countries that are reasonably run. So my friend now says to me, Oh, so you're a utopian. Utopian globalist. Well, not really, actually. You know, how did I put it? Trade needs tending, and there certainly have been instances where the U.S. didn't tend it properly. And I would point to, in particular, the fact that when industries are in decline because of trade, because of technological change and demographic change of various kinds, people coming out of those industries generally need some help. The U.S. Definitely erred in the 1990s and the 1920s when a lot of factories in the South closed down, and there were upwards of 1 million people who lost their jobs in those years. That's been very well documented by the profession. The error there was that there was a pretty decent program for providing what was called trade adjustment assistance for people coming out of factory closures, but the funds only reached about 20% of the affected workers, and as that difficult transition played out, that helped a groundswell of anti-trade sentiment accelerate. There were other things that factored into that too, of course, not just that. Likewise, the U.S. made another major policy error that arguably set the stage for Trump's glide down the escalator in 2015. President Obama negotiated the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP. The purpose of this was to basically build a cordon around China and connect the island nations that surround China, and including Australia and New Zealand, connect them with the United States using U.S. trade law as their guide. The administration tried to sell that as a trade policy, but it wasn't actually that. It was designed really to force China to join the West, and to give up aspirations of control in the Asia-Pacific region. That had a good shot of working, but Trump from day one said no way he was going to support it, and when Hillary Clinton said that she wouldn't support it in the waning days of the campaign, that's when we knew that the ground had really shifted in terms of the public's views about trade. I need to wrap this up, and so there are some furthermore comments here. Excuse me just a second. Okay, yeah. There we go, sorry. So finally, what do I think of Trump's trade policy? You can guess. For poor developing countries, the reciprocal tariffs will harm them in the short run and push them away from the U.S. as a trading partner in the long run. I think I don't see any way out of that. For the United States, I would say that the Trump policies represented a large unforced policy error. Likely even more of an error than the wage and price controls President Nixon imposed in 1971, and possibly a bigger error than the Smoot-Hawley tariffs of 1930. What we'll see about that. I would call Trump's actions aggressive, unilateral actions. I would say that those are going to force our nation to pay a very high cost of making things at home that could have been obtained much cheaper abroad. But to put that in plainer language, we're going to become poorer. If these tariff decisions persist, as a nation, we will be poorer. We will have slower economic growth, and we will have fewer resources with which to challenge China in the Asia-Pacific area as it tries to turn its Asian-Pacific neighbors into vassal states. Trade expansion with negotiated tariff reductions over the past 80 years played a huge role in global economic growth from the 1950s onwards. That's a record of which the US should be proud, and I think really can be proud. Providing more or less steady leadership, we worked with many allies to open up space for global investment and trade that provided large material gains for virtually everyone. Trump's program appears to be one of turning inward, shedding allies, focusing on rebuilding domestic manufacturing. And I concur that a significant manufacturing capacity is needed, needs to be rebuilt for the sake of long-run US national security. But to do it unilaterally and without allies, that's a fool's errand. In short, I think Trump has things completely backwards. It's trade that's beautiful. It's tariffs that are ugly. Thank you so much.
So we now have some time. We now have some time for some questions. I'm going to have to enlist the people in the aisles to help me out here. So if you have a question, just keep your hand up, and I will pass the mic along the aisles, and hopefully it will get to you. So, got one back there, so I'm just gonna keep going all the way back.
Steve, would you say to the MAGA people about your presentation? And number two, what about corruption? How is corruption going to be impacted by these tariffs? Because President Trump is going to be in charge of negotiating. He already did it with Meta, with Mike Zuckerberg, with Mark Zuckerberg, that he doesn't have to apply for these tariffs.
So I'm not really sure what to say to MAGA aficionados about this. I think we're likely to see some change of heart soon in some quarters. As experience teaches us some hard lessons, I think that's on tap. In terms of corruption, I think that is something to be concerned about. The turn that the U.S. is taking now, by bringing manufacturing home, subsidizing a lot of it to make our manufacturing base powerful again. Some of that subsidization is wise. We let our ability to make chips get shockingly out of date, given the geopolitical crises we may face soon. That had to be addressed. But the general approach of basically using industrial policy to gas up U.S. manufacturing, that almost certainly will create all kinds of avenues for corruption. And the U.S. will need to be vigilant about that. I think it could end in tears, but we'll see.
This may be a question more for political science, but what gives Trump the right to be the authority and the implementer of tariffs? Isn't that a legislative thing?
So
how did Smoot-Hawley get put in place, which was a disaster?
So that's a really good question, and I left that out of my talk just now, but I'm happy to address it. Trump is used. Well, first of all, in terms of Smoot-Hawley, that was the last tariff that followed the letter of the law of the Constitution and was a tariff that was proposed by, designed by, and approved by Congress. President at the time, it was whoever had to sign off on it, but that's the constitutional process for setting tariffs. Now, for the sake of actually setting up fair and reasonable import standards and tariffs for the growth of the world economy from the 1950s onward, Congress temporarily, several times, delegated its authority to the president, delegating presidential tariff authority is what they called it, PTA. There were always strict measures on that. The president had authority for a given number of years to negotiate particular tariff pacts with other countries or with the GATT or the WTO. The president had to deliver to Congress a finished trade agreement that then Congress could vote on up or down. That, I think, maintained a reasonable consistency with the constitutional requirement, and it allowed for some efficient negotiations, because otherwise, if you've got hundreds of Congress people trying to negotiate hundreds and thousands of tariff lines, that's a recipe for disaster. What Trump has done is that he's reached back and begun using executive orders based on particular expectations of what the president might need to do in emergency situations. And so Trump is using two now more than 50-year-old laws to do what he's doing with tariffs. When he leaves office, those could be, they're executive orders, and so they could immediately be rescinded by the next president. They could be rescinded by the Supreme Court if a case gets there, as I think it will at some point reasonably soon. He has stretched. I think it's fair to say that he has really stretched the meaning of the executive authority that he has through these executive orders in a deeply troubling way. The particular one that authorized the tariffs on the quote unquote bad actors was an executive authority that was about national emergencies. And I'm sorry, Taiwan subsidized a bank. Oh golly, that is not a national emergency. And this is he is stretching those out of all touch with reality. And I think the sooner Congress addresses that, the better. I'd love to see some Democratic and Republican Congress people really get after that.
Didn't the Republican Congress, didn't Mike Johnson make it so every day is just one single day, and so in the Senate they can and maybe have taken away some of the authority, but Mike Johnson says there's only one day.
Right, and so there's no room to bring a motion forward. Right, because it happens the next day.
Which there isn't one.
Which there isn't one of, yeah. I really shouldn't speak to that. I'm aware of that, but I can't really say anything sensible about that.
So it's pretty clear that Trump wants the Fed to cut rates, but with the fear of potential increasing prices along with the fear of a potential recession, how do you think the Fed will respond to these tariffs?
Yeah, that's a hard one for me. I'm not a student of the Fed, but I can speculate. I think they'd be in a terrible bind. The reality is that with the combination of potential unemployment with inflation, that's stagflation. The last time we saw that in our economy was in the late 1970s. I remember 18% interest rates while there was 10% unemployment, and it was just crazy, just a terrible time. I'd like to think that it won't, that if we had stagflation, it wouldn't go that badly. Stagflation is real trouble because there's no obvious way to use regular macro tools to deal with it. So I would defer to, like my colleague Rick DeVries or others about what the best options there would be.
I'm trying to figure out a way to phrase this question that avoids too much of areas that are not your expertise, but I guess to keep it economical as much as possible.
Sure.
Given what you said, it seems like economists are fairly in agreement that these sorts of policies will not work the way that Trump intends. Are there existing economic theories that might back a move like this? What do you think the reasoning behind this? Do you think it is as straightforward as he says, given that it seems pretty clear what he is claiming will happen probably won't, according to economic theory?
Right. So I am not aware of any outstanding economic theory that says the best thing to do for your country's well-being is to really cut back on the goods you buy from overseas. Try to make everything yourself. Really, honestly, the last country that, apart from North Korea, is still doing it. The last country that really tried that was the USSR, and they built, with their satellites or nearby satellites. So arguably, some proponents of Marxism would lean that way. So I shouldn't say that there's never been a theory like that, but it's right now I don't think there's anyone really making that case. I'm sorry. What was the other part of your question?
Just trying to understand what might have motivated this.
Yeah. Look. Yeah. What makes Orange Man tick? I don't know. I don't know. That is a difficult question. And our situation is really complicated by the fact of the rise of China, and the fact that its economic system is really perpendicular to a free economy and a free democracy, and so we're shedding allies, and we're making it very difficult for ourselves, to flourish at a moment where we need really clear thinking about how to handle China. And I think we need allies for that, and I think we need a lot of cooperation for that. I think we're in a real pickle.
This might be a bit of a follow-up to that question.
Sure.
I've heard lots of commentary that part of this plan is to kind of rectify the U.S. paying the price for everyone else's success.
Right.
And I'm just wondering if you can explain that logic, because from your presentation, especially the phrase, we swim in trade, but we think we make stuff, is that part of this assumption that the United States has been footing the bill for everything, and now it's our turn to make people pay?
Oh no! On the contrary, it's that we think we make stuff when we're at home and we fry an egg. We're swimming in a sea of trade, meaning that we are deeply tied in to trade domestically, trade abroad, trade within our state. And that deep specialization in exchange is hugely important for the welfare we enjoy every day. but we don't recognize that we're embedded that way in an enormous trading system. Maybe someone else, I listened to the whole Trump talk yesterday, and he used some really offensive language about other countries. It was, and as you pointed out, was bitterly complaining about other countries ripping us off, stealing our stuff. That's, and of course, without referencing anything that the U.S. ever did, where we might have stolen a patent or two from the British, this is, first of all, there's a certain level of irritation that countries can live with together. The animus that he exhibits, I find very telling and very distressing. Look, you can make a case that China, did steal a lot of U.S. intellectual property. No question. U.S. firms have generally wised up. There's a bit of an exodus now coming from China. But to think that Taiwan or the Netherlands or Britain or Thailand are ripping us off, that's nuts. That's disconnected from reality. Yeah. And that's not to say that there might not be a company in Thailand that does that tries to steal U.S. intellectual property rights. We need to be vigilant. We need to have a fair way of assessing when countries have overstepped U.S. law. We would really help ourselves if we cleaned up our own tax system, which right now still actually gives Chinese firms lower tax rates when they invest in the United States than U.S. firms get when they invest in the United States. I'd love for Trump to do that. That'd be tangible and helpful. Likewise, there's with pharma right now, we've basically under the Trump tax package that was passed in his first term, pharmaceutical companies are basically being paid by the U.S. to leave the U.S. They're not paying taxes. They've decamped many of them. They're paying taxes to Ireland, but not to the United States. That's crazy, and that's something we can deal with and fix. We need a leadership that's willing to tackle those things and step by step clean those up. And I worry that we're not going to get that from the current administration.
We have time for one more question.
So, if your prediction is correct, and if the economy really takes a nosedive, what should we do? What can we do to prepare ourselves as individuals or as a families? We cannot change the big. We cannot do a big change, but as individuals, how should we prepare?
So I shouldn't overstate the case. The United States is, of all the nations in the world, it's a continental-sized economy. We've got enormously talented people in the country. We have depth of education and training that's second to none in the world. And so I'm not forecasting. If any country was actually going to try to make it work without trading with the rest of the world, we would take. I would never recommend this. We'd take a big beating, and we'd get lower incomes for sure all around. But we'd survive. With kind of 1930s level of survival, So I'm not recommending that, but I don't want to say that you know, hell is breaking loose right now, and we need to stock our shelves with you know, food for survival.
Would you all please join me in thanking Dr. Smith one more time?